All right. Shall we dive into this den?
Let's do it.
All right. Yeah, with gusto. How are we doing? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the General Geekery Podcast, the podcast where we geek out about all of the things we love to geek out about, with no remorse, no regrets, and with all the enthusiasm at our fingertips. As always.
Hello.
Yeah, like that would be weird if we could just fire enthusiasm just from our fingers, like the lightning bolt Sith Jedi Force thing. That'd be something.
Oh, yeah.
As always, this is Donald Kaczynski, your coffee ninja by day, actor and gamer by night. With me, as always, the artistic master herself, Hannah Kubiak.
Hello.
And today we're going over... It's been a while since we had just a singular topic to discuss that wasn't like a total discussion thing like the past two episodes. And I'm actually glad you brought this topic up, Hannah. Hannah was the one who chose today's topic. Today we are talking about the world of vampires. Was there any specifics on what you wanted to talk about in regards to vampires?
Not really. No, I have some notes from research that I did, and I actually just finished reading Dracula like 20 minutes ago. So,
I can't.
Classic Hannah, finishing the material right before we have to talk about it.
Well, I mean, at least you finished it, and two, the more recently that you read it, then the fresher like the response will be. So, honestly, I find it perfect. So,
Good.
So, obviously, we really don't need to flat out explain what a vampire is. It's one of those monsters that you find in fictional media that's basically so ingrained into our culture. It's common knowledge what a vampire is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Because you got all the different like vampires, like they can't go into the sunlight. Sometimes they'll combust. They drink blood, everything like that. But there's more to vampires than just that, and there are many, many different interpretations of it over the years, especially from as far back as like the first like fictional writings of vampires from like the 19th century.
Yeah.
So with that being said, everybody usually has like a idea of a vampire. Like whenever they hear the word, like an image will instantly pop into their mind of like what an example of a vampire is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for me with a vampire, it's always whenever I hear the word, I always think of like a tall imposing figure, but with kind of like a soothing voice, like reassuring voice, but there's still like an air of menace behind it.
Yeah.
That's just my generalization of it.
Yeah, definitely. There's that sort of hypnotic, seductive power that they have.
Mm-hmm. Every single time.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Yeah, so I don't really, this is the first time I've ever read Dracula, the book. I'm familiar with vampires and some of the lore about it and stuff, but when I read the book and when I did some research of my own, I didn't realize how much I didn't know actually about these stories and just the myth or of the vampire from different times and different places.
Right.
Like let me see. Well, my research that I did, I listened to some other podcasts. It was something my coworker recommended, a podcast called Lore, and their very first episode was about how how vampires sort of entered the American mind in relation to tuberculosis.
Oh yeah, that's
Have
right.
you heard that story? The story of Mercy Brown?
Yes, I actually have. I actually didn't even remember it until you actually just mentioned it. I've mentioned on the I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast yet, but I actually, for one of my college credit classes back in like my third or fourth year of college, it was an online course
Mm-hmm.
that basically we were studying the the lore of vampires from early examples from back in old Germanic days in like the 11th or 12th century to now with the fictional medias and examples of that. I remember that name coming up in one of the discussions that we had. So I'm
Yeah.
familiar with the name, but unfortunately I don't have as many of the notes that I took during that class because unfortunately it was all online and it's all lost
Yeah.
now. Thank you, university, for that. So I'm not as brushed up as I feel like I should be on that. Do you want to share that?
Yes, I would. Yeah. I mean, you're more of the expert here, so what I know, I'll go ahead and share it because it's not very much. So,
I would say less expert and just more enthusiast in my
okay,
case.
okay. Yeah. So, Mercy Brown, a um she was a young woman in Rhode Island, and it actually kind of started with her father and the rest of her family. Her mother fell ill with tuberculosis and died, and then her sister also got tuberculosis and died, and then Mercy Brown died of tuberculosis also, which back then they called it consumption because it would just sort of like waste away at your body before you died, which is kind of one of the maybe reasons why tuberculosis is sort of linked to vampires because they're in the legends, they suck your blood and they cause you to waste away into nothing, and the vampires are always kind of described as being like really pale and gaunt and stuff.
Right.
But the so her father, I think his name was George. Yes,
Hmm.
let's call him George Brown. He his son Edwin also got tuberculosis, and
Oof.
at this point, Mr. Brown had some friends and acquaintances who basically said, "Yeah, I think probably what's happening here is somebody in your family has some sort of curse that they're bringing down upon your family, and that's the reason why they're all wasting away and dying." Um, so what they ended up doing was they dug up all three of the women, the mother and the two sisters,
Mm-hmm.
to basically see who had the curse. And the person who had the curse, it would be evident by the fact that they would still have blood in their heart. So they dug up the mother, and she was really severely decomposed because I think it had been like a decade since she died or something. And then the other sister had been decomposed as well, but Mercy Brown,
Mm-hmm.
um, she still had blood in her heart. And this might have something to do with the fact that she died in the wintertime. And so she wasn't buried because the ground was too hard. So she was kind of stored in, I think, like a crypt or something. And her body basically froze. So it was kind of like the way that we store bodies in really low temperatures to sort of preserve them nowadays. But they didn't really think of that at the time, I guess, because they said, "Oh, she must be the source of the curse," and so they like desecrated her body. They cut out her heart and her liver, burned them, and then they made like this tonic by mixing the ashes with water, and they had Edwin drink it.
Jeez,
And
that's nuts.
the really crazy thing about this is after drinking the tonic, he still died.
Jeez.
Yeah. So, yeah, this story, it took place in Rhode Island, and it was part of the New England vampire panic. 1892 is when this happened. And then 5 years later came Bram Stokers Dracula. So some people think that this was part of one of the things that inspired Stoker to write this book. And the really cool thing about this story is that it kind of brings to mind sort of these other mythological creatures that are like undead creatures, things that died and yet are still walking the earth, wreaking havoc, or creatures that suck people's blood, you know, like there's this Celtic Norse creature. I'm not sure if it's a creature because it's still basically a human, called a revenant that comes back from the dead, or it's like this walking corpse with a purpose, and they usually prey upon their family members. Which is probably one of the reasons why the people in this town, I think it was called Exeter, Rhode Island, people in this town decided that there must be some sort of family curse, and that somebody in the family was the source of this curse, was because of this legend of the Revenant, who would return and prey on their family, basically, for some wrongdoing or something like that. And at the time that, oh, wait a minute, no. What am I saying? Yeah, so Bram Stoker's Dracula, written in 1897. And then in 1922, there was that movie Nosferatu.
Yes.
Which was basically ripped off of Dracula, I think. Like, there was some sort of...
It was. There was, like, some kind of... I don't know the full details, but I think there was, like, some kind of, like, copyright dispute over some of the names, so they actually had to change some of the names part of it.
Well, yeah, they did. They changed the names and stuff, I think. But then also, like, Stoker's widow brought that movie company basically to court and sued them, and she won, like, bankrupt that company.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But Nosferatu is like a Romanian term. It means the same thing as vampire, basically. And at this time, like, it really seized people's fear and imagination, this idea of this creature that its bite would sort of infect you and make you into another thing like it, because a couple of years earlier had been the 1918 flu pandemic. Mm-hmm. So, like, nothing was more feared than disease and being infected. And there was also a lot of cases of polio coming up as well at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Which caused a lot of paralysis and stiffness if you survived. So that's why there's a lot of, like, that might be where some of the sort of like zombie kind of movements come from, or just like how slowly the vampire will move, you know, like when it's rising up out of its coffin, it's kind of this very slow paced kind of thing. There's also this podcast called Mythical Monsters, which has an episode about Nosferatu and Dracula, and this timeline that I've been talking about kind of came from that.
Right.
And they also mention a little bit of the sort of the plot of the book Dracula a little bit, but that's in the book, so I I had read it.
Well, true, but like it's important that we talk about Dracula because honestly, when you talk about like modern day vampires, like no matter what, all of it basically everything that can connect them boils down to the original Bram Stoker novel Dracula. That novel basically was the seed that sprouted the tree of just vampires in the popular culture.
Yeah.
Because every culture had a concept or a belief or a figure that represented the undead in their respective times.
Yeah.
I mean, as far back as like early Mesopotamia with the underworld and things like that, or even the times of ancient Greece.
Yep.
But vampire was not really even a term that kind of came to fruition until I want to say the early Germanic days, and like the 12th or 13th century was like when like the first early examples of like what would soon to become like the modern day vampire would form.
Yeah.
And of course, obviously, with when like the setting of Transylvania basically is a common fixture with most vampires because most vampire stories usually involve Dracula in some way, shape, or form. Generally.
Yeah.
So let's dive into Bram Stoker's novel, like Dracula. Basically, okay, not just in terms of like vampire lore or anything like that. I think this is probably like one of the most important novels that has been made, and I honestly believe everybody should read this at one point in their lives. Because it's so weird from basically just like a narrative standpoint how the book is structured, especially because it's all written in passage of information through like diary entries and letters through all these different characters and viewpoints.
Yeah, that's right.
So
I actually I found that really sort of strange and confusing at first, but eventually I got used to it. It grew on me.
It kind of
Because I've definitely read books before where it's like quite obviously a person writing this down and it's supposed to be something that you as the reader found in somebody's attic or something.
the structure kind of reminded me of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's works on Sherlock Holmes, where basically everything is written from the perspective of John Watson.
Right, yeah.
But this one is from the perspective of multiple different characters and just reveals clues as they come forward. It's almost like it's like a murder mystery, like a supernatural murder mystery type story.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the reveal of basically how the modern day vampire would basically come to fruition.
Yeah.
And of course, just the dialogue of Count Dracula when he's talking with Harker, like I bid you welcome, Mr. Harker, and all that. I'm just like, like how many interpretations of this book has been translated onto like visual media, like television or films?
Oh, so many.
Too many to count. But it all has one source, and just this source is something. It is something to witness and behold and read.
Yeah. Oh, so good.
So, you had just recently finished the book for the first time.
Yep, not 20 minutes ago.
So, overall thoughts on it?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, there were some points at which I kind of I'm knocking things over here.
Careful.
There was some point at which I got a little bit lost, just with just because it was kind of long, and I was on a deadline, So if you ask my roommate, I basically, from the time I got home to the time I went to bed, was just reading Dracula, sitting in our living room. I'm surprised I didn't have any weird dreams.
Dang. Don't end up like
I think
Lucy.
the thing that I found the most fascinating was Dr. Seward's patient, the lunatic who would eat flies and spiders.
Oh, yeah.
I think he coaxed some birds into his room, and he ate the birds. Just so weird to me.
Seward, why exactly are you eating that live pigeon?
Yes. I think his name was, what was his name?
I'm looking it up right now. I have the
lunatic, something with an R.
Renfield.
Renfield. Okay, yeah, Renfield. I really enjoyed that because there's this sort of underlying, well, not so much underlying, it's very blatant, just imagery of animals and being devoured and having your energy sapped, and just just the blood.
It's true.
So much blood.
That is very true. And so throughout the book, this book really kind of introduces some of the cliches that are come to known with just vampires in general. For one, garlic is supposed to repel them. Two, you kill them with a wooden stake through the heart, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But also some not so well known ones, their apparent ability to not be able to cross over water. I don't think the daylight rule was introduced in this original novel. I think that came at a later point.
Yeah, I was kind of confused by that because there was daylight at one point. He came out into the daylight many times. With one time when at the very beginning, and Harker was in his room in the castle, and he was shaving for the day. And it was morning time, and the Count just appears right next to him, and it's obviously daytime. It's kind of not consistent because near the end of the book, it seemed like the fact that it was daylight was sort of keeping him. He couldn't go out in it. The very last confrontation with him, he was basically being transported back to his castle in his box, and it was daytime, and he couldn't come out.
I feel like the novel basically said he's more effective at night. He's able to survive in the daytime, but he's not as powerful or as influential as he is within his element of night. So there is that. Another thing that basically was introduced in the book that basically I don't think was made it is the ability for a vampire to transform, except I don't believe Dracula transformed into the supposed bat that the cliche would be, but he transformed into a dog. Supposedly.
That's right, when he escaped from the ship, right?
Yep. And
the one where he killed them all throughout the voyage.
Yes, and
sorry, I got something in my throat here.
No, it's okay. It's perfectly okay. And oddly enough, that is basically like a cliche trait that's usually passed on to other notable vampires, mainly the son of Dracula, Alucard. Oddly enough.
Mm-hmm.
I just found that to be a fun little tidbit when I read that for the first time, because
Yeah.
some of my first introductions to vampires was through the Castlevania games, and both Dracula and Alucard are in it, and of course Alucard has the ability to transform into a dog and everything like that, and I'm like, oh, so this is where like all these different things come from.
So this is why. Yeah, and he transforms himself like into a mist. Can get through tiny cracks in the doors and things.
Yeah.
Oh, and he has to be invited in by somebody. That's another one.
Oh yeah, that's another cliche. That's another one. Like that. I think that one was I think that one was like further explored within like the 2010 movie, like Let Me In or something like that.
Yeah.
Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't.
That one's an interesting take on like the vampire lore, things like that. Just a
Did you
fun one.
see the miniseries on Netflix just called Dracula?
I feel like I've come across it. I haven't sit down and watched the entire thing.
It's interesting. You'll have to tell me what you think of it.
I absolutely will. Oh. Oh. Good coffee. But yeah, like whenever people think of vampires, usually like the first thing that pops into mind is like their interpretation of Dracula. Cuz he's basically become the figurehead of like just the concept of vampires.
Yeah.
And it's a big reason why. I mean, he was basically the vampire mascot for like all of the early monster movies in like the 30s, 40s, 50s, everything like that.
Yeah.
There are so many different interpretations of him that are, some are kid friendly, others are more faithful to the original source material, and some just go bombastic out of the way and just create its own lore based off the character.
Yeah.
But I think something that's not really as well known for a lot of people like before that is that there have been examples of like vampires like before Dracula, like pre-existing Dracula within the same century.
Yeah.
But of course, Dracula became the most well known among like the concept of vampires.
Yeah. Yeah. The funny thing that when I was researching this stuff, something that I learned was that not as much of Stoker's inspiration came from Vlad the Impaler as we think.
Yeah, that's...
He was basically just a extremely violent warlord in Wallachia, right?
Yes.
And his name was Dracula, which basically just meant son of the dragon.
Right,
and,
right.
Yeah, he was just extremely violent. I don't think he drank anybody's blood or anything, but he did kill and torture people in very exquisitely painful ways. Like he would impale them on stakes, which is why he was called the Impaler.
Right.
And there's some description of just like forests of impaled bodies sitting out in the middle of wherever he happened to be, kind of like that very first scene in Castlevania where what's her name was walking up to the castle and there's all these skeletons on pikes just sort of
oh yeah, when
laid out there.
Yeah, that's right, when Lisa Tepes first met Dracula.
Yeah. But that's about it. Just the name is sort of drawn from that, and also maybe just the whole impaling thing, because that's one of the things you have to do to a vampire to sort of pin it down, is stake it in the heart.
Yep, you gotta stake it in the heart. But yeah, you are right. Like, there were illusions of, like, Count Dracula being inspired by some of the acts of Vlad the Impaler, but somehow, like, for most people these days, like, for a lot of people usually confuse Count Dracula for Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah.
How did that get mixed up is what I want to know.
I don't know, man.
Because we all felt that, because we all got that confused at, like, one point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I found another, like, inspiration for Dracula that's pretty cool. It's this woman named Elizabeth Bathory.
Carmilla. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I was just about to mention that too.
Yeah. She's known as the Countess of Blood.
Mm-hmm. The Countess of Castle Chazette.
Yeah. And so she's one of the lesser known inspirations for vampire myths. She's often called Lady Dracula because she is the most prolific female serial killer of all time.
Mm-hmm.
She had a whole, like, torture chamber that she had, and she liked to hire female servants, and then like, she would drain them of their blood, and what was, I had a brain fart. She would drain them of their blood. She would drink the blood. She would bathe in the blood, thinking that it would make her immortal.
Oh yeah, like, you look at the background for her, like, Elizabeth Bathory is, like, more screwed up, like, lore wise than I think Vlad the Impaler at times.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think there was some thing where she ended up being caught because she befriended, I think, like, a young duchess or a countess or something, because she wanted royal blood to make her even more immortal. Like, but yeah, eventually somebody figured out that this girl was not actually just visiting her friend, the countess, but was being held captive and being basically drained. You know.
Right. And the crazy thing is that if I remember this correctly, like, just the tale of, like, Elizabeth Bathory and everything like that was what inspired another vampire story that actually predates Dracula by, like, 25 or 30 years, called Carmilla. It's and the crazy thing is it's a mostly female centric story, and some people actually find it one of the earliest examples of lesbian love, like, in, like, those times, which is honestly kind of cool, like, when you read to it, like, but because it's a female protagonist with Carmilla being the other side of that, and there's a connection between the two, but then the acts happen, and like, all these girls and women around them keep disappearing because Carmilla's attacking them, all that. And I'm just reading this, and I'm thinking to myself, why are we not focusing on this a little more? Like, Dracula deserves all of the admiration that the character, as well as the original source material by Bram Stoker, gets, but why are we not focusing on Carmilla just a little bit more?
Yeah, who knows, man. Oh my gosh.
Because dang, it was insane.
Let me see here. Yeah, there's all sorts of weird myths and weird superstitions that people have surrounding just undeath and the sort of proclivity of the undead towards it's like sucking the life out of people, or like there's this Norse creature known as I think it's pronounced Draugr. Like a walking corpse. It's very strong and it can shapeshift, and it's just.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, let's see. And just the weird things that people would do to corpses to keep them from rising from the dead. Like there was some people are found like covered in cages or in iron cages, or lying like face down in their graves, or with like just iron stakes all through their bodies to keep them from going anywhere.
Or the entire corpse's mouth being stuffed with garlic. Thank you, Van Helsing.
Or Or I'm just sort of scrolling around on the internet here. There's a picture here of the famous vampire of Venice with a brick stuck in its jaw.
Oh yeah.
They buried it with a brick in its mouth, so it couldn't. I don't know.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the earliest example of what we could now know today as a curb stomp.
Yep.
That was a bad joke for me.
Who am I to judge?
True. But yeah, like I think more fascinating than just like the vampire stories itself is basically like the lores and myths that inspired the fictional characters based on some of the real peoples like Elizabeth Bathory and Vlad the Impaler.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy how it's gone from just that, and then you look at like vampires today in like fictional media, and you see them be these super powered beings, everything like that can do. In some cases, they can do magic, like summon fire or have abnormally gifted strength or anything like that. And then you compare it to like the original roots, and I have to think, when did the concept of vampires kind of get blown out of proportion a bit?
I have no idea, man.
Like,
I only just finished reading this book. Okay.
No worries. I was just saying what I was thinking, because I just had that thought pop into my mind when I was thinking about that. I'm like, it's like, cause you look at the character of Dracula in the original Bram Stoker novel.
Mm-hmm.
He plans, he schemes, like he takes everything, like he plans everything carefully with like all of the things, because it seems like vampires have a lot of weaknesses that can be exploited in the Bram Stoker novel, but Dracula's able to carry things out with such precision.
Yeah.
But then you look at like some vampires today, and like they just seem like untouchable. And I'm like, what is it about vampires that just makes us think, oh, we're not worthy. We're not worthy. These are amazing superpowered beings. I don't know why, but for some reason, like they, at some point in time, like they transformed like the concept of vampires in certain areas to like be as powerful as like superheroes.
Well, it's the draw of being immortal, I think. Right?
You may be right. You may be right, because I know people kind of blow immortality out of proportion sometimes when it comes to fictional characters.
I wouldn't want to live forever. No, thank you.
Oh God, no. Are you kidding me? I would lose my mind by the second century I lived.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Probably before that.
Yep. Like 10 days in, you realize, oh my gosh, this is never going to end.
I've made a terrible mistake.
Basically. Yeah. Nope. I wouldn't choose it. Definitely not.
Indeed. Especially just like how like the immortality or like eternal longevity is like described as like what Dracula has to go through, like in the novel, like just the fact that he has to be transported everywhere in coffins filled with ground from the homeland of Transylvania.
Yep. In a box full of dirt.
Yeah, I'm like, huh. Well, dang.
Not how I would choose to travel.
No siree, Bob.
So undignified.
So uncivilized.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh.
But yeah, vampires, my god. And to think, like, originally vampires were basically just like a little bit of like a subcategory of just the general term of undead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there are so many different terms and examples and different examples of creatures based on just the concept of undead. Zombies being one of the more prevalent. Then you have vampires. For some reason, some people put werewolves and ghouls into the area of undead. I don't know why you would put werewolves into the undead, but okay.
Yeah, I don't know either. Because they don't live forever, do they?
No,
Werewolves.
No, they don't. And they're also people that are alive unless like something happened. I don't know. I'm not too familiar with like the entire like werewolf concept.
Yeah.
But maybe we will for another time, but
maybe we'll talk about werewolves at some point.
Woof woof. But yeah. God, I want to read Dracula again.
Yeah, you should. Maybe I'll swing by and drop it off hang it on your doorknob.
Oh, take all the time you need though. Don't worry.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to read any of the extra information that was on in the back of the book here. There's like all sorts of like essays and stuff.
Definitely check those out. Like they're just fun to read.
Yeah. Yeah, get yourself some background in here. Oh man, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that anything else that stood out to me. Do you have something?
Well, I'm trying to think. No, I lost what I was thinking of. Just something that stood out from you in the book.
Yeah.
Oh, I just remembered. So
Go for it.
So with all this talk of vampires and things like that, like obviously we love like all forms of like entertainment, literature, shows, movies, or anything like that. Any piece of vampire media you always like to indulge in from time to time?
Let me think here. This has kind of been my first. This is the beginning of my undead journey, as they say. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely sort of, as I was reading it, was thinking about stuff that I've seen or heard about, and like to compare it to, like the miniseries on Netflix that I watched. When I watched it, I was some of it I kind of thought, huh? But when I read the book, I was like, oh my gosh, that super weird thing they did in the miniseries is actually based on something they did in the book. I wasn't expecting that. Like,
yeah, it's kind of nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me see. What else? Well, as you know, I have I really enjoy Supernatural, and there are vampires in that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Anything occult like or supernatural or anything like that, of course, will be in Supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
I just realized I can't finish that without saying Supernatural twice.
Nope. No, you cannot.
One of my favorite examples was actually, this one's a little outside the norm, but I actually mentioned this film earlier on. I was trying to make sure I had the name right. It's called Let Me In.
Oh, okay.
It's a vampire film from 2010 that is basically like it's a vampire film involving a 12-year-old boy and a girl the same age.
Mm-hmm.
I won't spoil anything beyond that, but
is one of them a vampire?
Yes, but I can't really spoil too much or anything like that because it's not really one that you would expect, but at the same time, it's just, huh?
Yeah.
It's kind of like outside the norm of what you would usually expect with like vampire media, and I'm like, this is actually cool.
Mm-hmm.
and keep in mind, I think this film was released right around the time when like the Twilight series craze was going around. So,
oh right, yeah.
Looking at this, I'm like, now this is a vampire. This is right. This is right.
Yeah.
Because
there's this show that I watched a couple episodes of called What We Do in the Shadows, which is like it's a British sitcom about a mockumentary about vampires.
Just from the title on that, it sounds like a peep show. I'm like, what?
It's pretty funny. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to take a look at that now.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty good. But yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot, not only about this particular book, but just about everything that surrounds it, and just the legends of all sorts of different cultures, just sort of centered around the idea of these undead things that suck your blood. Like, people are so imaginative, no matter where you're from.
Yeah, people really are, especially like when it comes to like things that invoke fear in others. I don't know what it is, but for some reason the human race is so good at creating catalysts for instilling fear.
Yeah.
Like whether it be vampires, witches, zombies, anything else, it's I don't know what it is. It's beautiful, but it's scary at the same time.
Yeah.
But
our ability to create terrible things in our mind.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yep.
But yeah, that's basically all I got on vampires. Basically, Dracula, of course, is a fixture in culture. If you haven't read the original novel, I highly recommend that you do, just to see like how everything started.
Yep.
Because you get the general knowledge of vampire versus like word of mouth because it's like a common sense term, but you won't know, you can't appreciate where it originally came from and like all of the little tidbits that come with it unless you read like the novel that basically jump started this entire fascination.
Right. Yeah. Oh man.
And also,
so yeah, if anybody wants more vampire stuff, definitely watch Let Me In, What We Do in the Shadows, Castlevania, Interview with a Vampire.
Nice.
I haven't seen that. I hear it's really good though.
I haven't either, so I'm gonna need to check that out too. There's so much. Read the classics. Check out some of the new ones, and for the love of God, do not believe anything that the Twilight series tells you about vampires. They are lying. They are lying. And
although
that motorcycle,
they are very seductive.
No, they're not. They're really not. I can't. I just can't.
They hypnotize.
Yeah, true. Well, the original vampires do.
Your stunned silence is very reassuring.
Have you been turned into a vampire? Are you becoming Lucy? But don't do this to me, Hannah. Don't do this.
No, I mean, I've seen no one for months, so...
She's talking like Dracula. We may have lost her, guys.
Oh my goodness.
We are so weird.
Yeah. I was actually just, I was listening to our episode where we talked with Andrew Kelly about RPGs, because I was looking for something to put on our socials. I was just listening to it. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is ridiculous.
and then you added in the quote of basically all of our podcast is mostly what did you say? Hold on, I got the quote right here.
It's like mostly just random impressions. Some of it is a discussion, and the rest of it is just Donald leaving to go close a window somewhere
in the middle of
in
the middle of recording. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you do that for just one episode where we have a guest on, basically because people are being
Mm-hmm.
loud, and you get labeled for it.
Yep.
Rightfully so, though. So it's okay. All right. So I think we can wrap that up right there.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the General Geekery Podcast, episode 30.
Yeah.
30 episodes of General Geekery. My goodness, it honestly feels it feels longer. It feels like we've been at this longer, but I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe just the days are just blurring together for me right now. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, if you guys liked what you listened to here on the General Geekery Podcast, make sure to follow us wherever we are, where podcasts can be listened to. We're on Spotify. We're on Spreaker. We're on Stitcher. And anywhere else where podcasts can be listened to. This podcast is also being hosted on my personal YouTube channel, Anime Revolution Productions. For those of you that don't have access to any of those streaming platforms, it is available on YouTube for general listening. Whenever you want to go listen to it, go right ahead. Just play in the background, do homework or whatever you need to do. Just enjoy our ramblings and our geekiness and have yourself a good time.
Yep.
You can also check us out on social media at General Geekery on Instagram and Gen Geek Podcast on Facebook and on Twitter. Hannah, where can they check you out at?
Well, you can find me rolling dice with my party every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Central on Loaded Dice Adventures, which can be found at twitch.tv/Loaded Dice Adventures. And yeah, we're streaming sort of remotely right now because of COVID. But so we're all in talking head mode right now from our different abodes. You can also listen to me on the Splankniks podcast, which is me and my mom discussing all sorts of nerdy things from the perspective of different generations. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Pythian Legume.
Excellent. And I know you just dropped a new episode today, so I got to go listen to that after we're done recording on that. And you guys can follow me on social media, Instagram and Twitter at RyuzakiMK7. And you guys can also check me out streaming most nights on twitch.tv at RyuzakiMK7 as well. So, as always, thank you guys again for listening in. This has been episode 30 of the General Geekery Podcast, all about vampires. For Hannah Kubiak, I'm Donald Kaczynski. We have to go retreat to our respective coffins and just never wake up again until the darkness has fallen across the land once again. But
and then the dark powers will arise.
Indeed. But always remember, until then, Stay safe out there, everyone, and always remember to keep your geek on.
Always. Clink, clink.
Indeed. Farewell, everyone!
Goodbye until next time.
I sound like the Count from Sesame Street.